guys, welcome back. I'm UnoPro and this is part 3 of beating the meta with cat. Today I'm going to be doing Nahla Immolation. I did put Nahla Immolation back from the last video just so I could cover Yukiko in a great match between Eminem vs Smarties and JKK89. Now Nahla is one of the new heroes from Griffin Bane with fire and prime magic, and it's mainly played as an immolation deck with some constructs and then returning those constructs to hand with Titan Workforce. Now Nahla's ability isn't really going to come up in these decks as not a lot of beastmen are used, and basically 1 in 100 games is going to come up. Mainly playing the deck for that fire school and those academy creatures. So the key cards for Nahla Immolation. Now Nahla Immolation is a deck centered around two key cards: Immolation and Titan Workforce. Now Immolation is going to be the main source of damage for the deck to the opponent's creatures. So it's going to be doing 1 damage to each creature on the battleground at the start of each turn, and this is basically how the deck works. What it's going to be doing, it's going to be playing a lot of creatures designed so that they will not take any damage from Immolation, while the opponent's side of the board is going to continue to take damage and consistently lose its creatures. Now the key thing with Immolation is that if there are no creatures left on the battleground, then it will be destroyed. Now this doesn't come up a lot, but if you get the chance, it can be quite a strong move to be able to destroy that Immolation, even if it means just bouncing the creatures back to the hand temporarily. Now onto Titan Workforce, arguably the strongest card to come out of the Griffin Bane series. An ongoing fortune that's going to continue to return all friendly construct creatures that die to its owner's hand. Now this is what makes the late game of a construct deck nearly unbeatable. If they can stabilize with a high health, all the requirements they need, and plenty of resources, they're going to be able to drop a large amount of constructs each turn, and that will simply return to the owner's hand should they die. Now this is basically undealable for any deck, so basically we either need to rush them down, or we need to limit their hand size earlier on in the game to prevent them from getting to this incredibly strong late game with Titan Workforce. Now I've included Obsidian Gargoyle here. You could include any creature from the list. Basically the whole deck is centered around creatures that either have Magic Guard, Spell Resist, or Magic Resist that will cause it to take no damage from Immolation. Now all damage is halved, and because you can't halve one, they take 0 damage. Now this is going to cause their board to stay perfectly healthy, while yours continues to take at least 1 damage at the start of each turn, and even more if you have potentially more Immolations out on the field. So what we need to do against this deck is we need to look for cards of our own that can deal with the Immolation, just like Academy's creature. Now often these creatures are going to be a bit beefier than the Academy creatures, especially for Stronghold's case, where they have Zephyria and Black Skull Crusher, and the Nahla Immolation deck is going to run very light on removal. So if you can get these cards out in a fairly safe position, in a safe lane, it's going to be very hard for Nahla Immolation to deal with, as all damage is spell damage. The only thing you need to keep out for with Zephyria is Akras Wrath, which does go through Magic Resist, whereas the Black Skull Crusher will stay completely immune. In other decks there are stuff like this, other creatures with spell resist, and etc. High health creatures are always good across the board against Immolation deck, as they're only taking 1 or 2 damage each turn, and this will normally mean they get at least 1 attack in, which can actually be a struggle against an Immolation deck. Now I've included the Black Skull Shredder. This is basically really nice for rushing our opponent down. And if our opponent manages to get Titan's Workforce out with a bunch of big health creatures, it can allow us to still finish the game through some stuff like Altar of Asher, Broken Bridge, War Tents, and that's basically tends to be the late game plan for Cat a lot of the time, where it's fallen behind on the board and needs to force through that last bit of damage with Black Skull Shredder. So the game plan against Nahla Immolation. Now Nahla's Immolation is gonna lose a lot of tempo playing a 4-mana Spell Immolation and a 4-mana Fortune Titan Workforce. Now these are going to take up the whole turn and do very little to affect the board. So we need to be constantly applying pressure, and when our opponent plays these cards, we need to have a strong enough board state and have the initiative so that we can play more creatures and set them even further behind on the board, so that by the time Immolation and Titan Workforce start to get rolling, it's too late and we've already killed our opponent. Now obviously this can't always happen. but it's not impossible to win the mid to late game against an Immolation deck. So basically, we want to look for the occasional opportunity to clear the board and destroy an Immolation. You have to remember that Immolation does die off if all the creatures on the board are gone. Now normally your opponent will do stuff to protect this, but it's always possible. For Cat we can't really rely on Insect Swarm like we normally would because most of the creatures don't have spell resist, but we can have stuff with like Broken Bridge, Sacrificial Altars, Altar of Asher type stuff. So you just got to keep an eye out for these opportunities. With other decks it can be a lot easier, such as Inferno is the easiest with just Doombringer, clear the board, can kill up to 4 Immolations at one time, and once the Immolations are gone, you're left with an Immolation deck with weaker constructs than other decks, and a bunch of creatures that have poor stats because of the Magic Guard and Spell Resist, which are no longer be doing much. Each deck is ideally going to have a couple of answers. So in Cat we have the Old Zephyria and the Black Skull Crusher, and because of the lack of removal in Nahla Immolation, these cards can simply win the game by themselves at times. In other decks, if you don't have an answer directly, you can still look for high HP creatures, and if you're playing Stronghold, you still got the Shredders as well. So if Nahla does stabilize with Titan Workforce and has a strong board, it can be impossible to win in the long run. So what we need to do is we need to push through the last 2 damage with some stuff like Shredders, Bridges, Altar of Ashes. With Inferno decks it can be stuff like Thor of Hatred, as well as some direct damage. So if you're a solo deck, it can be quite hard to verse Titan Workforce, but you still have to apply pressure early, attempt to win in the mid game, and look for opportunities to clear Immolation, because that's your best bet. If they can stop the Titan Workforce and the Immolation, the deck is very vulnerable to being beaten easily. So let's get into a game I played recently against the Nahla Immolation. Now, I'm going first, which is never what I like, and I greedily choose to mulligan my hand here. I know the Insect Swarm and Golem Scouts will die off pretty easily. I don't get a great hand in return. I have no 1 or 2 drop and 2 Insect Swarms. Arguably I could keep it there, but I was going for a bit more pressure, especially considering going first. Now he has quite a decent start here, allowing him to play 2 1-drops. Now he's seizing the tempo greatly, which is quite strong for Immolation deck because it allows him to play the Immolation and Titan Workforce without falling too far behind on the board. I don't hit my 2-drop either, which is not looking great, but obviously an Immolation deck isn't going to be applying a lot of pressure early. Arguably he wastes his Campfire there. He could save it for something better, but it's not the end of the world just to cycle it through. And he's arguably looking for stuff like Circle of 9 and Titan Workforce. So I simply just play the Bloodcore Shaman. I'm playing it in front of the Scholar because ideally, with this board out, I can actually Insect Swarm and kill off quite a few creatures, and ideally have some remaining damage to kill off the Scholar, which will be left with 2 health. So he has kind of an awkward hand here. He can play his 1-drops, but then they lose their invade and are quite vulnerable. So he basically just attacks, and we're not under too much pressure, but we don't want to continue to give our opponent everything he wants, because we don't want to let him play Immolation easily. So basically just play a War Elephant in front of the Skull again, for the same reasons. No reasons to block here. We are the ones who want to be the aggressors eventually, and we're really not worried about early damage. Nahla is going to beat us through a strong board and strong ongoing spells and fortunes, so we don't have to worry about taking too much early damage. So he gets the Immolation deck out, and here I decide to make a bit of an aggressive play. So it's very important to consider tempo. So what I mean by tempo is that we are making the plays and forcing our opponent to react. We are playing the creature, and then they're having to defend with creatures or spells. So here, I Insect Swarm, I leave my board a bit vulnerable, but with the Immolation out, that can still leave me options. So I managed to get in a decent amount of damage, play a Harpy as well, and force him into an awkward position. So at 4 magic, with the ability to go up to 5, we have to be careful of Akrath's Wrath. Though at the moment we're not too worried about it, as it will just kill off the Immolation anyway. So he decides to play a second Immolation, and this isn't a great situation for us. But here I'm thinking 2 Immolations can be extremely hard to beat, especially in a longer game. My hand is very creature light, So basically I decided in the next few turns, if I get the chance, I'm going to try and kill off everything on the board, so I can get rid of those immolations. And as you can see, he only has 4 cards in hand, so if I can get off those immolations, then I have a really good chance of winning the game. So here, I still play patiently as an insect swarm isn't actually going to kill off too much, and decide to just draw some cards because I'm playing patiently. I'm trying to make sure I can clear the board. There's no reason to rush anything, no need for sacrificial altars or anything. So he's left with only 2 creatures on the board, and I have quite a big hand size. So I'm thinking now maybe I can win in the later game. He does search for that Titan Workforce, and no matter how far a Titan Workforce deck gets behind, if it can stabilize, then it can always come back, because it has insane draw power. So here I decide I'm going to Sacrificial Altar. Broken Bridge, I should have campfired first, of course, because you always want to draw first if you're going to draw. So I get a really nice turn here, destroying 2 Immolations, bouncing his hand back to the deck, still have card advantage, and I get to play 2 creatures. Now this is a really nice turn for me. He does have the Titan Workforce though, plus the Makeshift Golem, so he's going to constantly bounce this back to his hand every time it dies, drawing a new construct creature each time. So that is going to allow him to replenish his hand eventually, but he is behind in tempo. He is getting lower, and so now I have a real chance to win, and I don't have to worry too much about AoE, apart from Akrath's Wrath, and maybe another Immolation. So I'm getting my Black Skull Crusher. It's really good news for me, as that card can win a game by itself, and a War Tent on the Black Skull Crusher especially is really strong. So I take the chance just to play my 2 Bloodthirst creatures, and abuse that free enrage counter he's going to be giving me. So he plays the Akrath's Wrath. We're not too worried about it. He goes a bit greedy, he's trying to draw some more cards instead of playing the next Immolation to kill it off. And so I take the choice. I'm gonna punish him for this move, just by just killing it off. He can draw another creature, but he's still behind on the board, and he's gonna have to spend another 4 resources playing that next Immolation instead of responding to the board. So I think that was a definite mistake there. He's been a bit greedy, trying to draw some more construct creatures. But as we can see, the power of those Makeshift Golems with the Titan Workforce allow him to constantly replenish his hand. And once again, I've killed off the Immolations. Because of Titan Workforce, he's still getting back in the game. So I know I still have to put pressure on him early. But thankfully, I have the Black Skull Crusher. This is basically no way for Nahla Immolation to directly kill it. But as we can see, he has some big Titans in his hand. We are going to have to continue to apply pressure. So, killing off the Makeshift Golem. You could try and stall him out from drawing cards by leaving it alive, but I feel that's a little bit too greedy. So I go for quite an aggressive play here. I destroy the Golem to get another 5 damage in there with the War Tent. Now he's going to go back to his hand, but we're looking to end the game soon. And we have Time of Need in our hand, so I'm thinking if I need to bounce creatures back, I can get New Zephyria. If I just want another threat that will stick to the board, I have Old Zephyria. So you got to constantly be thinking what you can get from Time of Need if you're playing in your deck. Now, I actually do make a bit of a mistake here. I do miss lethal just by a little bit. I instead choose the Broken Bridge. Instead I could have played a War Tent to actually win the game. But I mean, mistakes happen, though honestly that really shouldn't happen. So I play Zephyria to give the Black Skull Crusher Swift. See, what I should have done here was instead Sacrificial Altar one of my own creatures onto the Makeshift Golem, drop a War Tent on and finish off the game. Fortunately I do not do this, but basically with my hand I know there's no way I'm going to really lose because he doesn't have any way to kill the creatures, and I have the tools available to get through that last damage, considering I have Zephyria and a Black Skull Crusher. So it's going to be game from here. He doesn't even really try to fully block off, but as you can see, this game was over. So it's basically a simple matter of giving the Crusher Swift, moving up to that top row, dropping a War Tent, doing that final 5 damage. So as you can see, the power of a Titan Workforce deck is evident if it can get to that stage where it can get the Titan Workforce out. Now we saw in that game the Nahla Immolation deck I went extremely far behind, losing those 2 immolation early. But because of the Titan workforce, combination with that makeshift golem, he was able to consistently draw more and more construct creatures that in the long run I could still lose that game. But I made sure to keep my hand full, giving me time to draw my threats. I was able to draw enough cards to find my Black Skull Crusher and my Superior, and able to apply enough pressure. Now I made some aggressive moves. Arguably you could play a little bit more passively, it's up to you, but you need to know that you are on a clock when you're versing a Nahla Immolation deck. You need to get them low enough so that they can't just play their 4-cost ongoing spells and fortunes, which will slowly destroy your board and fill their hand. You have to apply some pressure and punish them. You can't let your opponent waste their turn just doing something that's just going to return cards to their hand without punishing them on the board. Now I got off to a slow start, but from then on I was applying as much pressure as I could. I was opportunistic in taking off immolations off the board. So the deck can be frustrating to play against, but we need to know how our cards, what cards we need to beat the deck. Now every deck should have some answers, whether it's simple as just having a high health creature. So guys, I hope you learned something in this video. Hopefully I can continue to pump out videos at a high rate. As always, I'd love it if you subscribe to follow up the series, and if you have any feedback, please leave in the comments, on the forums, or on the Reddit thread. Thanks again for watching guys, I'm UnoPro, and